everybody, I just wanted to do a quick video to recap some of the important stuff from last week, week number 1. Hope you're liking the textbook. It's a little different than traditional textbooks, a lot of textbooks, with a little different of narrative. The title of the textbook, Voyages, by Valerie Hansen and other people who collaborated. But I love the way each chapter starts off with a travel narrative. Travel narratives are a great way to look at history of how individuals are traveling and interacting with different peoples, adapting and seeing different things. You see the technology being used, you see all this stuff. And no different with chapter 1. And we're looking at the development of people. Whatever your views are on that, it's interesting. It's important to know what academics are looking at. Again, if you look at my video about the production of history, and that applies also for this chapter 1 of how we view ourselves, how we look at the creation and answer the question of how we got here as in human beings on Earth. And that's, that changes all the time with more evidence, with more technology and able to see, with looking at, if you look online right now, there's all kinds of information just in this last year of the spread of migration of early peoples, kind of getting away from the idea of the Bering Strait, which our textbook talks about. All those things are constantly in flux. But beyond that, there's important trends and things to look at for this chapter. And that's what I want to spend a few minutes to look at. All my videos here are going to be short and try to keep them so just to get the information that you need. I know you're busy, and thank you for taking the time to watch these videos. Again, today I apologize for the sound. My microphone just went out, so I ordered a new one, so that should be coming. So it's a little tingy. Don't like that, but we'll move on. One thing to look at is how to use popular images that we have. How do we use that with the past? So with this first chapter, what I was kind of alluding to in some of my questions was, how do we look at the caveman and the Geico commercial of even a caveman can do it? There's other images you can think of too. Think of the Flintstones. Think of any movie or depiction, the Disney movie that also looks at the caveman and all this stuff. How can we use that and compare pop imagery of the past with real history? Because that's an important thing. How do we work together with that? And a good place to look at is popular imagery of history is to see how and why images came about, see if there's truth within them, and then looking at historical evidence, are those the same? So I was hoping last week, if you were to create an image of what the stereotypical caveman looks like, and if you coincided that with the evidence that we'd looked at last week, remember those Venus figurines, with the culture that was going on, with Paleolithic Society, the Old Stone Age, would your image change? Now, I hope it would, because a lot of the evidence shows something different going on. But also there's a difference between Paleolithic Society, the Old Stone Age, and then moving into general trends of what's known as the Neolithic, the new Stone Age, right? There's a trend there. And it's important to understand the difference. There's Mesolithic in between there as well. So Paleolithic is gatherer and hunter societies, right? And I always try to say gatherers, hunters, because actually in that society, a lot of evidence shows that they were gatherers first, hunters second. Most of the society survived and was sustained by caloric intake of gathering more so than hunting. Now that's important. Why? Because in those societies, overwhelmingly, who were the ones doing the gathering? Well, it was both men and women, but women did a lot of the gathering. And that shows a society trend that's an important part of the Paleolithic society. If most of the society is sustained and surviving based on the gathering of food mainly done by women, then they're the ones also in charge. Also, they're the ones bearing children. And fertility was a big part of Paleolithic society, as evidence shows. So women's role, if you look at gatherers, hunters society, were incredibly, incredibly important in Paleolithic society. Things start to change when you get into Neolithic society, right? Neolithic society, a big thing that characterizes Neolithic is settling down into places. Why are they settling down? Well, because they're watching the plants grow, right? So they're starting to get plants and starting to say, this different grains here would work, and they're selecting different types. They're starting to plant them. They've realized if they plant them there, things will grow. Environmental factors play a big role in that, with different evidence shows that different climate changes became more sort of calendar sort of climate changes. So you get a summer, you get winter, you get changes in all the weather patterns that are allowing for growing cycles to be more regular. That allows for people to start creating growing seasons, and then you want to protect them. You want to protect your food. You might as well stay there because you need to work the land and work the land around it. So people start to stay put rather than following trends of gathering foods, following fast food, as I like to call it, of animals migrating areas, and staying put. And that changes everything, doesn't it? So if you look at how that happens around the world, it happens different places at different times, but in a similar process, where Paleolithic society, people, gatherers and hunters, start to settle down in certain regions. And those regions where people are settling is what we're looking at this week, of settling down, and creating complex societies as they do that. So they're settling down in these river valleys. Some historians like to call this areas within the lucky latitudes. Now, you'll see the very first societies that emerge are within certain areas of the globe, and they're in certain areas within similar environmental factors, such as river valleys. So access to water. That's, of course, for the people, but also for the plants they're growing. In certain areas, there's some societies with environmental accidents, you might say, have certain animals around them that they're able to start to domesticate, as well as certain different foods that have different types of caloric value to them. And that changes the society from the very beginning, that goes all the way through till today. So you see differences as before Columbian exchange that we're going to get to, and if you're in my U.S. history class, we talk about that a bit, where Western Hemisphere starts to interact with the rest of the world. But before that, and in this time period, those early settlements in the Americas, they don't have beasts of burden. They don't have horses and all that. There was actually about 10,000 BC, supposedly, there's evidence that there were camels in America, that there were small horses in America, but they were hunted to extinction and killed. Most famously in Arizona, there's evidence of what's called the Walmart camel, because when they were building a Walmart parking lot, they found ancient, very ancient camels. Probably traveled across the Bering Strait and different other land masses that we don't even know, land bridges. But most of these large animals if they were here, they were extinct in the Americas. Llamas in South America, but can't do too much with llamas. If you've ever been around them, they spit on you and do everything else. And they're different. They're different than horses. They're different than cattle, but actually could do a lot of different things. So when we're looking at this week of how societies are settling down and how the environmental factors around them allow them to create certain societies. Also, what it's other sort of competition between other groups, creating the need for certain cities to have protections, walls. And remember, you read in the first chapter that some of those cities don't have walls. Well, that tells you they don't have to protect themselves as much as like Jericho, ancient Jericho, which did have a wall. And even in biblical, if you're a biblical scholar, is talked about in the Bible, and a lot of other societies. So we're going to read this week about Enkidu, a great travel narrative. I love the name Enkidu. If you have a first child, you should name them Enkidu. It's a wonderful name. The earliest recorded stories that ties in Mesopotamian culture, we'll get into that in my next video, and also the religious changes. That's something that occurs throughout the world as people settle down. You start to see rising of different values. You see the rise of paternalistic culture, where men for the first time have a leadership role in these societies. You start to see technology being innovated for all different uses. You start to see values of religion. You start to see how power starts to reshape itself in these societies and how to gain control over the people that are settling down in these regions. So that's the basic small stuff I wanted you to kind of see. This trends from Paleolithic, people gathering and hunting, settling down into these river valleys across the world. You can see the map of how these people start to settle down. And in those very valleys where they're settling down, those are the civilizations that we're going to look at throughout this class, and how they start to adapt and change, and in some cases dominate the world, in some cases completely collapse, and how they are susceptible to environmental factors. You hear a lot of words today. It's a lot of people arguing one way or the other with ideas of global warming. However, if you look at history, environmental factors have plagued societies, have ended massive, long-standing empires. It's nothing new to see environmental factors playing out. And it's something from the beginning of our class up until today that plays a role in the story of civilizations. So that's chapter 1. I hope if there's any questions, it seems we're moving along pretty good, but I just wanted to get some main things together of how to look at, how we look at imagery of the past, how we change this view of the stone caveman into a very complex individuals of Paleolithic, moving into settling down, becoming Neolithic, and then creating some complex societies. And that's what we're going to look at this week. So check out that video, and I'll chat with you soon.